Greetings, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Philip, to come and speak to you all. And I know the room is full of scientists, and so anything I might have to say about climate change, you all have many more details and thoughts on. But just kind of to establish a baseline here, how many folks here believe that the increase in carbon dioxide from 270 to roughly 400 now is a result of human activity? How many would disagree with that? How many folks feel that increase in carbon dioxide is changing our climate and effects on the ground in all kinds of ways? How many would disagree with that? Well, okay, there it is. All right. I'm persuaded. When a group of scientists come together with detailed analyses of all kinds of things, that's a very powerful situation, and something that I'll come back to later in the speech in how you all need to have a voice, a public voice, and an impact on this issue. Although this room was all hands up, America is not all hands up about carbon dioxide. Many folks don't know that the atmosphere has changed at all. I was reflecting on the fact about the time I was born, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere had gone up to about 315 parts per million. And people shortly thereafter started to have concerns about this, and by 1987 it hit 350. And 350 has been a number anchored in the public discussion, in part by 350.org, noting that in many studies that would be a number that we need not to exceed if we're not going to have a very significant change in the climate. And of course, as all of you know, the number now has hit 400. 400 briefly before the summer leaves came out, but it will be hitting 400 again as the leaves start coming off this fall. And I think more to the point is that when we hit 350, folks said, we've got to change the slope of this curve and come back down to 350. And instead, here we find ourselves busting through the barrier of 400. Now, I wore a pin today. It says 400. You all would have probably guessed it what that meant. But many folks wouldn't know, and they would ask, why are you wearing the number 400? Well, I have some extra pins here in my pocket if anyone wants one. You want to create a conversation with folks who are not part of your scientific community, because it's hard for the public to get their hands around this slow change in the atmosphere and the consequences thereof. And so being able to utilize some way to start those conversations. I mean, one way I put it is 400 is the most important number on the planet. And then explain why. Now, it's no coincidence, as we hit new landmarks in carbon dioxide, we also are hitting new landmarks in terms of the effects on the environment. And you don't have to travel the globe to see this. Here in Oregon, as I go about my town halls, one in every county every year, I have lots of conversations about things that are going on. Down in the Klamath Basin, since 2001, there have been 3 worst ever droughts, 2001, 2010, 2013, this summer, which has a profound impact on that agricultural community. Last summer, we had the largest forest fires in a century in our state. One fire the size of Rhode Island, all by itself. And this summer, we've had another heavy fire season. We have smaller snowpacks in the Cascades. We have smaller glaciers in the Cascades. We have more pine beetle in our forests. We have a situation on the coast where the oysters, and specifically the oyster seed, we're having difficulty thriving because of the higher acid content, the higher pH level in the Pacific Ocean. And obviously the oyster industry is a very significant part, but it's also kind of a canary in the coal mine. If oyster seed are having more difficulty, what else is going to have more difficulty as the acid levels increase? So when folks say that they don't see any impact, it has to be because essentially either they're not paying attention or they truly don't want to see an impact, because it's everywhere. You don't have to see firsthand the drunken forests where the forests in Canada previously grew over permafrost. It is no longer permafrost. And you don't have to see the smaller ice sheets on Greenland or the smaller Arctic ice mass or so on and so forth. But you all, through your studies, are drilling in to many, many of these details. The bottom line is this: carbon pollution is the greatest challenge facing humankind. And right now, humankind is failing the test. If we summarize the path forward, we need to end our addiction to fossil fuels. Carbon below ground is having a profound impact on carbon above ground. So how do we translate all of this into public policy? Well, for a starting point, the public is not persuaded. Only 18% of Americans in a 2009 study were alarmed by global warming. Another third, another 30+%, were concerned. So roughly half. Half of Americans either concerned, a few were alarmed. Well, that's not the type of thing that creates a big push in public policy, especially when the other half is often persuaded all of this is just a conspiracy, a scientific and public policy conspiracy with no basis in facts. They don't agree that there is an issue here. Well, since 2009, we've had some dip in public belief about the importance of global warming, and then a little bit of a return. The most recent study I've seen, the Pew Research Center, from March of this year, viewed 33% of Americans saw global warming as a very serious problem, and 32% said somewhat serious. So at least we're getting a little over that 50% mark. So how do we talk to Americans about this issue? Well, one of the most important things is a continuous flow of facts from the scientific community. And I'll give you an example. One article I read last year was about the expansion in the range of the armadillos. Well, that was kind of an item that made it into a lot of newspapers. And maybe armadillos are not going to alarm too many folks, but when it's woven in with many other stories about little changes, then people start to see reinforcement. Now, part of the challenge is we've started to become a nation with two different sets of media. And if people are tuned in only to Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and friends, and if they're tuned into newspapers that aren't running those little stories and large stories in their connection to climate, they're going to be absolutely convinced of the conspiracy side of this view. But that's why it's so important to keep getting the pieces of the work you're doing out into the press as broadly as possible. Second is, we need to think about how we have this conversation so it's not an urban and a rural conversation. Now, I deliberately just gave some information here in Oregon about fishing, farming, and forests. And when I'm doing my rural town halls, I found that changes how people look at this. I was at a town hall down in the south, actually in Klamath, where someone said to me, you are talking about the need to create living wage jobs and investment in infrastructure, and yet you're concerned about the Keystone Pipeline, which would create several thousand construction jobs. And I said, well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why I'm concerned. Because we are right here in Klamath County, going through its third worst ever drought in a little over a decade. And hundreds of farming families right now are under a new set of decisions regarding water rights. And they're losing their water rights. And quite frankly, our water table is dropping here. Pumping is very expensive. The flow from the normal irrigation system decreasing. It's a huge assault on our agricultural base. And it's not just here in Klamath County. It's in other parts of the state. And I talked about the impact on timber and the impact on fishing. You know, a lot of folks fish, and they don't like the idea that those summer streams are smaller, and those summer streams are warmer, and that's bad for salmon. It's bad for steelhead. As I walked up, I saw a chart over here. I think someone's doing a special session on the steelhead. And I saw in the agenda someone else is doing a session on salmon. Well, that resonates. That resonates. And when I finished and said, so we have really, in global warming, an attack on our three primary bases of our resource industry, our fishing, our farming, and our forest timber products. And that's why I'm concerned about the Keystone Pipeline. That audience broke into applause in conservative rural Oregon. And so I want to encourage you all to think about how we talk about these issues in ways that are real for folks. Out here in Oregon, it may not be a real compelling argument to talk about Hurricane Sandy. In the Northeast, Hurricane Sandy has dramatically changed the conversation. And the greater temperatures in the ocean water off the coast set the stage for that, both the path of that hurricane and the amount of energy that was in it. But that may not have an impact here. So our challenge is to shrink the slice of the energy pie that comes from fossil fuels and to forego the dirtiest forms. And that's why we should think very carefully before, as a nation, becoming a major coal exporter. We should at least have a public conversation and understand the impact on exporting coal in terms of global warming. It's why I've called for a programmatic environmental impact statement to be the foundation for public discussion before we make decisions that are irreversible in this area. And there's lots of other concerns folks have about coal, just in terms of the trains going through towns en route and the dust and so forth. But, and this is really a conversation I've been taking to the administration, is if the president goes to Berlin and says to the world, we must work together on this issue, America, under his leadership, also has to make some tough decisions. Otherwise, you have no credibility speaking to the world if you're not willing to address some tough decisions here at home. And that means the administration should be backing a thorough study before we continue the path in granting permits for coal exports. And it means the administration should be saying no to the Keystone Pipeline. Now, tar sands not only are a vast resource of additional fossil fuels, but they're one of the dirtiest forms. And the administration, which I support on so many issues, I disagree with on this. They put out a study, and they said, if the pipeline isn't built, an equivalent amount will be done through other pipelines running through Canada or through trains. Well, it so happens that doesn't match the facts on the ground. There's huge oppositions to pipelines running from the tar sands west through Canada. Not only does it have to get approval from many provincial governments, but from First Nations, as they refer to them in Canada, that have great concerns. And trains are much less cost-effective in transporting fuels than pipelines. And let's talk about jobs. Yes, we should be investing in infrastructure and creating construction jobs. China is spending 10% of its GDP on infrastructure. Europe is spending 5%. We're spending 2%. Barely enough to replace the aging infrastructure that we have. In fact, often not enough to replace the aging infrastructure we have. So we should invest a tremendous amount, and there's far more than 3,000 jobs in that challenge of building the infrastructure we need in this nation. And when that pipeline is done, it's just a small number of jobs to maintain it. I believe it's less than 100. So there's far more jobs at stake in a national infrastructure challenge than there is in a decision that creates a process of greatly increasing the fossil fuels that will be burned. So, not only do we need to think about those issues, we need to think about conservation. We need to think about each one of us whether we should be driving a plug-in hybrid or a full electric car. We need to think about how we can create jet fuels from cellulose rather than pulling it from underground. There's a host of potential strategies. It's our investment in solar, our investment in wind, our investment in geothermal. If we use less and more of our energy comes from renewables, the inescapable consequence is we put a lot less carbon into the air. By the way, I got a Volt a year ago on Labor Day weekend, and I love that car. Anybody else have a Volt? See, not okay. Low market penetration here. It's an electric car in town, and when your family has to go further, it's gasoline. And here in Oregon, electricity costs you 3 cents a mile, and the Escape I had cost well over 20 cents a mile for oil and gas. That's a pretty good savings on top of the fact for every mile you drop 1 pound from the amount of carbon dioxide you put into the air. So just a little pitch for folks to think of. How about the Leaf? We have some Leaf owners? Not many. Other hybrids? Bikers. That's Oregon. All right. That is awesome. Better yet. Well, good job, biking community. We need more available market competitive rentals that are electric to back up your biking for those occasions when you might need transport. There are multiple challenges here. One is big coal and big oil will invest heavily, very, very heavily in discounting any of the work that you all do in publicized. We know this, for example, what happened with the email issues that were turned into a scandal to try to discredit all the scientific work being done around the world. They will hire massive numbers of lobbyists. They will maximize their use of campaign contributions. I like to describe it this way. They will have super PACs and super lobbyists and super fake science. And that is a challenge. And meanwhile, we should be thinking about those 3 areas that most produce carbon dioxide: buildings, transportation, and electric generation. And here, let me put the counterpoint in for President Obama. In the face of congressional paralysis, it's President Obama that has increased the mileage standard for cars, and it's President Obama who is committed to applying standards that will essentially phase out the burning of coal for the generation of power. And there's a representative of the team here, and we should applaud the Obama team for those administrative actions and say, well done. In terms of the building portion of this, one of the concepts that can have a big impact are low-cost loans for energy-saving renovations or energy-saving retrofits, as often called. President Clinton came into a meeting I was in, former President Clinton. He spoke for 20 minutes about the best bang for the buck in creating jobs are low-cost loans for energy-saving retrofits, and he went on to note that that's because the jobs are modest in pay but living wage, that because they can't be outsourced overseas, And because virtually all the components for energy-saving renovations, from insulated doors and windows to pink cotton candy insulation, are made here in the United States of America. And all the time, I was sending him mind waves because I wanted him to say, and two of the major pieces of legislation on that are being led by Senator Merkley. It didn't work. One was Building Star, to have those low-cost loans for energy-saving renovations. There's a lot of stories out there about, for example, the Empire State Building and the massive savings that they've experienced with a complete overhaul of that building, from variable speed fans to all of the glass in the building to the elevators, you name it. Well, there's a lot of buildings like that that can be retrofitted to massive change. Creating jobs, creating a more comfortable building, creating better outcome for the use of energy. And the second bill that I was leading is called Rural Energy Savings Plan, or shorthand, Rural Star. And this is a bill that I've partnered with colleagues across the aisle. We've passed it through the U.S. Senate twice, but we need to get it through the House. And so we need to have advocacy for these types of measures, whether it's on buildings, whether it's on transportation and support for mass transit, or for plug-in stations, electrical generation changes. We need to have legislation as well as what the administration can do under its current authority. And in that regard, we have a couple challenges I want to make sure you're aware of. One is the 501c4 loophole. Let me explain. 501c4 is the social welfare structure under the IRS code. And the law says that donations must be used exclusively, the word's right there, exclusively, for social welfare purposes. The IRS put out a regulation, and the regulation says exclusively means primarily. That's kind of Orwellian. That's 100% being changed to 50.1%, completely inconsistent with the law. That can be changed. It can be changed by the administration telling the IRS to make the regulation match the law. And that loophole is used on the left and the right. Groups on both sides that want to use the anonymity of the charitable code to hide political activity. So it's a bipartisan transparency issue. Second, we have Citizens United. This is that 5-4 vote of the Supreme Court that said there is no corrosive or corrupting impact from unlimited money in campaigns. Now, if anyone here has been in the political world a little bit, you might kind of disagree with the Supreme Court. There's a whole history of how big money corrupts, corrodes the political process. Think about how one company, and I'll take Exxon as an example because they make a lot of money, if they had put in 6% of their net profits in 2012 into the presidential campaign, they, as a single board, as a single company, would have spent as much money as the rest of America put together. They would have matched all the spending that was done in the presidential side on both sides together. One company, one boardroom. That's a tremendous, tremendous imbalance. It's why folks like me who might have stepped on the toes of big oil or big coal say to the world, if you want folks who are going to fight these battles, you have to help them. Because there have to be a whole lot of small donations to make up for the potential super PAC role. And many folks have said, I mean, you know, the super PACs, they didn't have that big of influence. We shouldn't worry about them. Well, in the last campaign, there was a super PAC that came into one of the Republican primaries for Romney, and in 3 weeks of buying up the airways, it knocked down Gingrich by over 20% from his previous standing, and he was basically out of the presidential competition. They do have an impact. And they have an impact even if the candidate they're backing loses, because they create caution. Folks who may have been robust on an issue are a little quieter, and folks who might have been quietly supportive stop talking about it. and folks who were near the edge of where to vote on a particular issue might flip to the other side. I mean, the spectrum shifts. So do not believe because most of the super PAC-backed candidates lost that they do not have a profound influence on public policy. And let's combine that with something else, which is the filibuster paralysis of the U.S. Senate. How many of you think Congress is broken? How many think it works really well? You know, there was a poll that said 92% of Americans believe Congress is dysfunctional. And I thought, what's wrong with the other 8%? I could not believe from the time that I was an intern for Senator Hatfield in 1976 to then being a U.S. Senator in 2009, what had happened to the U.S. Senate. If you think about the fact that the filibuster was a courtesy of letting people speak before you held a simple up and down vote, and with rare exception, very, very rare exception, the way people prolonged the dialogue wasn't by objecting to an up and down vote, it was by speaking, sometimes speaking at length. That's why we have this vision of the talking filibuster. Now, the rules didn't change. People could have objected, but they saw it as unacceptable to object that there wasn't enough debate time unless they themselves had something more to say and were willing to be there, standing before the public, letting the public weigh in on whether they were a hero or a bum. Now, however, with the partisanship that has created this huge divide in America, people are willing to take a 1 second to object when they have nothing to say. Let me paint the picture. It's Monday. There's been a debate on a major bill the previous week. No one else has anything left to say, and so someone says, ask unanimous consent to hold the final vote. And one person says, I object. No explanation. Takes 1 second. That means that on Tuesday, a petition is filed with 16 senators saying we want to have a vote to close debate. We can't vote on that petition until Thursday. And if we get 60 votes behind that petition, we still have to have 30 hours more of debate before we can have a final vote. So a week has been wasted by 1 second objection by somebody who wasn't willing to stand and make their case, but just wanted to slow the process down. This is captured by the difference between Lyndon B. Johnson, who during his 6 years as majority leader filed one petition to close debate, and Harry Reid during his first 6 years, so not including this year, his first 6 years as majority leader has filed 391 petitions to close debate. This is why there was no replacement bill for the sequester, because the bill couldn't get 60 votes to get onto the floor. It's why we don't have a budget conference committee, because the conference committee, even though the Senate has passed a budget and the House has passed a budget, is being filibustered by the Senate Republicans. What they have to fear about the outcome of a conversation with the House leadership, I do not know. But they've thrown a brick into the works nonetheless. And we see that at every stage. Over the last 2 years, there should have been, by the end of this month, there should have been a total of 36 spending bills go through the Senate and conference and come back. The total is 1. 1 was done. So we're doing continuing resolutions, which mean we're running into these showdowns. End of September, end of the fiscal year, a few weeks away, there'll be another showdown. Will government shut down, or will it be a last-minute decision among a few leaders in the back room to produce a very large equivalent of the 12 spending bills, not written in the light of day, nobody will know what is in it, vote will be held a few hours later, terrible for democracy. So we have to end this. This is why I am calling to end the filibuster on motions to proceed to the floor. Get rid of it on conference committees. Change the 60-vote requirement to extend debate to 41 who say they want debate extended instead of 60 wanting it closed. The absent folks then count for moving forward rather than counting for paralysis. And when we have those 41 votes who want to continue the debate, someone actually has to be standing and debating. And the moment there isn't anyone, you go to a simple majority vote. That restores the equivalent of the social contract that has been with us throughout until the last 15 years. You know, one of the bills I'm working on is Employment Non-Discrimination Act. Totally different field from what you're involved in. This bill for fairness for our LGBT community came within one vote of passing 17 years ago. And I describe this because it was a controversial topic. And yet, everyone agreed it would be a simple up and down vote in the Senate. Today, there are more than 50 sponsors to this bill, but we have to get 60 votes. And we don't know if we'll get those 60 votes later this year. Think about the issues you might care about. Are we going to close loopholes that have existed that subsidize oil and coal? 3 times we've had a majority vote for that in the U.S. Senate. 3 times we've not had a supermajority that made it go forward. How about the requirement that we have these tax credits to help support renewable energy, but those have sunsets. They have to be re-extended. They're called tax extenders. That means we have to get 60 votes to extend the support for renewable energy, which means that an industry that opposes renewable energy can easily build a group to block that from happening under the abuse of the filibuster. In fact, lobbyists used to, before it was publicized, lobbyists used to advertise this on their websites. I'll help you block legislation you don't like because I have good access and can make sure there aren't 41 votes or 60 votes to close debate, if you put it that way. So these procedural issues are important to democracy because not only is it affecting the very things that we need to be addressing, the important issues in the world, whether it be living wage jobs or whether it be global warming, but in addition, it's creating enormous cynicism for our children. You know, as I grew up, I heard about an America that came together and addressed the Great Depression. And you all know the litany of things that were passed to do that, from the FDIC insurance on bank accounts, from the Security Exchange Commission restoring integrity to the stock world, and so on and so forth. The rewriting of mortgages, more than 1 million mortgages that were callable mortgages were rewritten. And then we transformed our economy in a short period of time to take on World War II. And then we built the biggest middle class the world has ever known after World War II. Today, if you had to have a Congress take on those 3 issues, we would fall flat because we'd be paralyzed. And we're falling flat on taking on the big issues that face us today. And that's why, since you asked me to come, and I know that you know the science more than I do, I wanted to share with you that perspective. And so here is the good news. People trust scientists far more than they trust anyone else on global warming. Your voice is the most important voice. Use it. Use it by getting publicity for the great work you do, the insights that you have on the impact of climate. Use it with your colleagues, with your friends. Use it, if you want, through a blog or through an op-ed. Because this is the biggest challenge facing humankind, and you all can help change the fact that currently humankind is getting a failing grade. Thank you very much.